My wife died in 2006. We'd been married for almost 17 years. Her name was Jeanette. There were countless stories of suffering and bereavement. I want change. I want you to know what I stand for. I want you to know who I am. My name is Adam Crizzle. I've so many questions about the cost, both human and financial, of what happened and continues to happen to people like us. Jeanette was a terrific person, very committed to the teaching that she did. She was an English specialist, somebody who used to make things happen, used to get great satisfaction out of the impact she made on the children she taught. As an individual, I mean, she was the love of my life. We'd been on holiday to Switzerland. She'd had an accident out there, a biking accident, and she was flown back, etc. In hospital for Switzerland for a while, and it was shortly after that we noticed her hair was coming out and she was becoming very tired. And we went to the doctors and they didn't diagnose it straight away, actually. And then when this persisted, then it was a few months later, then suddenly she was taken in. The leukemia was there, it was there. There was very little we could do about that. I wanted to understand why there were so few people on the donor register, because I couldn't quite understand. With 6.5 billion people on the planet, I found it hard to believe that there wasn't somebody who had a similar connection with her, a similar racial background.
There are thousands of tragic cases like Jeanette around the country each year.
By right, if you meet the criteria, you're entitled to a transfusion and a transplant.
For a long time, we have not done as well as other countries in promoting organ and tissue donation.
Transplants in hospitals should be seen as normal, not an abnormal outcome.
The key for society is to have a consistent approach to it as opposed to one that is driven by circumstance.
The purpose is really to educate young people into the reasons behind donation and the importance of it. I created a questionnaire and just walked the streets and surveyed people, and I asked them just some straightforward research questions. What did they know about donation? So we took that information, and then one of her colleagues at school, who's the science teacher, he got involved as well. And he helped me with doing some explanations in schools. So we did this survey where we went into 4 different schools at sixth form level, and we basically said to them, would you become a donor? And it was something like 23% odd said they would. And then he did a simple presentation as to what being a donor really meant. And then he asked the question again, would you become a donor? And that figure went from 23% to 90% saying yes. And the not sures went from 66% down to 3%, and the no's hardly changed. Well, for us, that was hard evidence that if you actually gave information to people, something could happen here. Taking all of that information, it was then saying about, what are we going to do with this? And having been, understanding that education is such a key thing, I turned it into a very detailed research report, got my MP involved, and he got me a meeting with the then health minister. We presented the report, we had some key solutions, and the key recommendation was that if the UK actually had an education programme as part of the curriculum, the national curriculum, what we would see over, say, 20 years, 20, 30 years, because people could be educated with this, we would see a natural increase in the number of people joining the registers when they got to 18, etc. So it all sounded very logical. I decided to take a research angle and set up this charity, but not to be an organisation to say convince everybody to become an organ donor or a blood donor or a donor of any kind. It was really to say, right, we've initiated this education programme, everybody can see the logic of the impact it could have. Now let's measure the effectiveness of that programme. Let's do nothing else. I plan for the worst and hope for the best. And I never set high expectations. I know that sounds really, really demoralising, but actually there's a motive for that. One of the first people I met along the way was my local MP, Philip Hollowbone. I was so glad when he agreed to be a trustee. Philip knows what needs to be done and is someone who has a great grasp of the issues.
The work of being a trustee is simply to provide Adam with support in his work with the trust. And unlike other charities involved in cancer-related issues, the work of the trust is fairly straightforward. It realises that it can't promote donation itself, but it can apply the pressure on the government to make sure that it fulfils its promise to have an effective donor education programme in schools.
The Jeanette Crizzle Trust reports regularly to the government and holds a mirror up to public awareness of blood, organ, tissue and bone marrow registration and donation. Have attitudes been changed by our actions? Do we live in a world where people will do the right thing? I'm not so sure. My film crew spent most of 2010 travelling around the UK to try and discover why the campaign isn't having the impact it should. It's beyond me how those in power have been blind to the huge savings an effective transplant programme alone would bring. The figure is hundreds of millions of pounds, an astonishing amount of money which could so easily help elsewhere. From the moment this campaign was born, we were fortunate enough to have immense support from the now Health Secretary, Andrew Lansley. This is all about the Give and Let Live education programme and to try and get a perspective from Secretary of State for Health. What are his views on it? How effective, why? It's about challenging why this programme hasn't been so effective, really. And I want to try and get from his point of view what he thinks.
My personal experience, I must say, is, for example, I was visiting a school in the constituency and about 4 or 5 years ago, and what we did with the school, was to say, let's involve the young people themselves in having exactly the same debate we're having at Westminster at the time in the Human Tissue Bill on the principles of organ donation and how it should be supported and whether it should be an opt-in or an opt-out system. And actually the young people really responded to that. They said, this is really interesting, this is just the kind of issues we should be thinking about. So I don't think there's any lack of interest amongst young people in schools in understanding these issues. What I think we have to do is in schools which have enormous pressure on them, on what's in the curriculum, actually to make sure that these issues, which are important issues for life and society, are issues that find their way into the curriculum because of the way in which they're being presented to match their curriculum needs.
Of course, this is a story I've a deep emotional attachment to, but I only have to listen to Jeanette's former colleagues to see how much of an impression she made. Her former head teacher has some great recollections from Jeanette's professional life.
I arrived at the school in January 2006. Jeanette was already ill. It was very clear, though, from the moment I arrived, just how fondly people thought of her and what a good teacher she was. She was here for a long time. She was head of English. She was a passionate classroom teacher, loved by the boys, loved by her colleagues. But she was involved in the whole school community. Places like this aren't just about teaching in a classroom, and Jeanette embodied that, really.
I'm not afraid of taking criticism. I need to know what more we can do and how our aims can be met. Why are so many schools ignoring us?
Sadly, I suppose initiatives get put on headmasters, head teachers' desks on a regular basis, and it's a matter of choosing which ones to put into practice. Schools are often driven by the day-to-day needs of education in such a way as perhaps the important things sometimes get forgotten about. I think the key is communication of the importance of the issue at a national level, and if that doesn't happen, then perhaps at a school level it doesn't get given the attention it deserves.